Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTGO codes, go ahead and check out the Poketown store. You can even get a 5% discount on your order using the OmniPoke code. For today's video, we are going to be doing the Cosmic Eclipse buy list. This is a monster set with a lot of interesting cards to go through. As always, I like to split up my buy list into two different categories. First of all, the core essentials, the cards that I think are going to be very powerful and things that you basically need to pick up if you want to sort of stay one step ahead of the meta. And then also a more of a believer buy list. If something catches your eye, you think you want to try out, and you think it's something fun that you could try down at League or whatever, that's the stuff for you as well. So let's jump into that first slide, which once again is the core essentials. These are cards I expect to be either in tier 1 or 2 contenders or have a lot of potential for the future. We'll start off on the far left with all these trainer cards. I usually try and be pretty liberal with trainers because they're, never going to break the bank, and there's always sort of the option to stick these into certain decks. First of all, the top line we have is the Tag Whistle and the Tag Team Supporters. Tag Whistle's a phenomenal trainer in the set, one of the strongest ones. It allows you to get any combination of 2 Tag Team cards from your deck. This can be Tag Team Pokemon, which we know have been dominating the game since they came out, as well as these new Tag Team Supporters. Red and Blue, I think, is a very strong one. It provides energy acceleration and a means of evolving up into GXs, which is really good for stage 1s and 2s. Typically, I would imagine this to be most important for the Dark Box decks, possibly things like Volcarona GX decks. So Red and Blue definitely does have some great versatility behind him, and he pretty much can be like an engine in his own right, so you want to max out the copies of that guy. Caitlyn and Cynthia seems to be one of the strongest ones as well, especially for Green's exploration-based decks. I think this definitely is going to outweigh the things like Ace, the Coach Trainer in Gardevoir Sylveon-based decks. Also, it can be a nice addition to, again, things like Mewtwo and Charizard, because it has the option of drawing 3 cards and then also recovering a supporter from your discard pile back into your hand for the following turn. So it means you can reuse Greens, and it means you can also get things like Welder back in certain decks as well, which is a really big deal. Mallow and Lana, as well as Guzma and Hala. I feel like you only need to get 2 copies of these. It feels like if you're just committing to a Tag Whistle engine, you might just want to shoehorn 1 or 2 copies of these cards into the decks. They're a bit more niche and not useful throughout the entire game, but they still do have their place within Tag Whistle engines, which I do think will become somewhat of a thing. It's kind of a throwback to Holland engines, if anyone played back in, like, what was it, 05, 06 kind of era, when we had the Holland Transceiver and a bunch of Holland supporters. This really is a nice throwback to that, and it feels like there's going to be the staples like Cynthia and Caitlyn, and then a couple extra ones that you just sort of throw in because you can whistle for them on those opening turns and they're useful. For example, Guzma and Hala, it gets you a Stadium, and you can also discard 2, and then you get a tool as well as a special energy card from your deck, which is quite versatile. There's a lot of different utility options there that you can go for. Think about things like Gardevoir Sylveon. You can go ahead and grab your perfect Fairy Charm for the situation, as well as things like Power Plant, developing that early for disruption. And in some cases, you might also work in things like Weak Guard Energy or the new Draw Energy that you can see as a 4 of on this slide as well, which I'll go into a bit later. Next up on the second line of supporters, Rosa is a really amazing supporter card for non-GX decks in particular. It is playable once one of your Pokemon was knocked out the previous turn, and then you're able to go ahead and get yourself a Basic Energy, a Pokemon, and a item card, which is really awesome. It really is going to help you mash pieces together. It can get you things like rare candies as well as your next stage 2 evolution. It can get you some nice tools. It can get you towards Great Catcher or Reset Stamp, some powerful trainers as well. So Rosa is going to be a godsend for any non-GX based variant. Next up we have Ends Resolve. I've pretty much put this in here as a 4 of just in case the sort of aggressive turbo Reshiram deck kicks off. I feel like if you don't believe in the Ends Resolve, you can sort of go down in copies of this card. I feel like even just regular Reshiram decks will play, I say regular, I mean like the Naganadel based builds. They'll probably play like 1 or 2 copies of Ends Resolve, so definitely grabbing 1 or 2 would be the bare minimum. But I've just been on the side of caution and had 4 copies, just because there's other dragon types that Ends Resolve might end up powering up as well, like Arceus Dialga Palkia or a few other dragon types out there as well. Professor Oak's setting is comparable to Professor Elm's lecture, and that should tell you all you need to know, that you'd need to get 4 copies of this card. It can get you 3 different Pokemon basics of different types and put them immediately onto your bench. This is really versatile and strong, and it will be a backbone of some certain decks that are relying on playing different types of Pokemon. Think about things like Quagnag that play multiple Poipole as well as Woopers. You even have 2 types of Wooper, which is awesome. There's also, of course, Ditto Prism Star, which go into a lot of evolving decks, which makes this card very, very versatile and powerful. Clay is also going to be a 4 of, I think, that you should pick up. You get to look at the top 7 cards of your deck and pick any item cards from that top 7, put them straight into your hand, and then you discard every other card. Discard synergy is a little bit light in the format right now, so having something like Clay, comparable to Hapu, may end up just winning out and being stronger. And we've seen that Hapu has found her way into all sorts of decks, be it Blacephalon, Mewtwo, even like Pidgeotto Control plays Hapu as well at this point. So Clay may end up finding a space in those sorts of decks to help out as well. Bellbella and Bryson Man is a fantastic disruption supporter. It simply says you can discard the top 3 cards of both players' decks as its regular text, and then you're able to discard 2 cards, and then you both limit your bench as well. I think it's down to 3 or something like that. But you want to have it for that primary effect. Yes, it is a tag team supporter, but I imagine this is most likely going to just find a home in Pidgeotto Control, because you are able to play this card, discard 3 from the top for both players to really increase the speed of your win condition, which is ultimately just disrupt your opponent's hand, make sure they can't play the game, and then simply start milling whatever they have left. So this is going to be a fantastic card for speeding up the process. I feel like you never need more than 2 copies. You may end up going for Surge, Bryson kind of plays, but at the same time I can also see this just being a one-off copy because of space, and you probably still need to have committed space towards the Jesse James and the Mars already in the deck, because the first step of your lock is always disrupting their hand first and then going for deck out as well. So it feels like this is only ever going to be a low copy of a card in the Pidgeotto Control deck, but I do think it's very strong. Great Catch is a no-brainer 4 of. It's phenomenal gusting. You discard 2 cards from hand and pick up a GX or EX on the opponent's bench, which is just phenomenal. There's also the new Lana's Fishing Rod. Thinking that we only really need 3 copies. I don't think there'll be any deck that plays more than that, because it is still slow recovery, because it forces you to shuffle a Pokemon and a tool from your discard pile into your deck. If it was more immediate, like a Rescue Stretcher from way back when, I'd be much more excited about the card, but I do think it's slow, but I do think it'll at least find a way into some decks as a 1 or 2 copies, especially because Rosa does open the door for more non-GXs to be a thing. Lily's Clefairy Doll opens up the door for hit and run, which I think is an amazing strategy in the game right now when gusting effects are limited. So I would definitely pick up 4. I think Beheeyem gets a new Breath of Life, which is awesome. And there's also the new Florsbuck deck, which I have to mention in every video, just because it's something that's always on my mind. The new Island Challenge Amulet is certainly an interesting tool card that minuses your GX and EX's hit points. I believe it's by 100, and then you give up 1 less prize card if you're knocked out by damage from an attack. Do bear in mind it only says damage, so you can get around this with placing counters or using status conditions or other means as well, things like abilities, to get the full value against tag teams or against GXs. But ultimately, this is used so that you give up less prize cards to try and win prize races, and that can be pretty aggressive and difficult to play around. So I do think some decks will be trialing that for sure. Celtic Swell is a phenomenal stadium card from this set. It's amazing at disrupting your opponent's stadiums, so you can put this into play, and then when your opponent tries to bounce this stadium by putting their own into play, you also eat up the thing that they're bouncing the stadium with, so the field will end up with no stadium in play. The main reason this is really powerful is because, like I said, it can disrupt stadiums from the opponent. That means if you're really worried about things like Power Plant or Shrine of Punishment or Lysander Labs, you can play Celtic Swell in your deck and make sure that you end up being the one winning the stadium war, and meaning that even if you are hit with like a reset stamp, your opponent can't also put a Power Plant down on the same turn, because obviously they're only allowed to put 1 into play each turn. So if you've got Chaotic Swell developed, they won't be able to do it unless they have their own combination of something like the Resetting Hole Marshadow to get rid of the Chaotic Swell, and then they put their Power Plant in for turn. So ultimately, it really does defend you a lot against those sorts of decks. So Chaotic Swell is very good for that reason alone. I've just mentioned Draw Energy as a potential option that you can pull out of the deck with Guzma and Hala, and this is just a generally strong, colorless energy. It does have to compete with Recycle Energy, which is a tough ask for sure, but it's a very simple card in that it counts as a colorless energy when you attach it, and you get to draw a card, and there will be decks that will just squeeze this in. Any deck that has like one colorless in their attack costs throughout the entire deck can definitely just squeeze one in over like a basic energy here and there, and really reap the rewards of just getting an extra card when you need to, which is really awesome. We'll go back up to the top line here and look at some great GXs from the set. Mega Lopunny Jigglypuff is a powerhouse. It does 60 plus 60 for each GX and EX on your opponent's side of the field, which is absolutely nutty, especially because it's an all-colorless attack cost, so it can be thrown into Welder-based decks, any decks that are also tag team-based, because we have Tag Switch. Dark Box can benefit from this, Quagnag can benefit from it, so many different ways where Mega Lopunny Jigglypuff can come in and punish your opponent for putting down too many Dedenes or just having a multitude of GXs in play at once. There's also the Silvally GX, definitely an interesting card. It has that Octillery ability where you're able to draw up to 5 cards in your hand, which is fantastic. It also has like a pretty decently chunky basic, so you don't just get wiped out by things like Mewtwo using Espeon Deoxys very early on in the game, which is awesome. It also comes with an attack which does 50 and 70 more if you play the supporter that turn, which is reasonable for 2 colorless, and there's also a GX attack that can just knock out your opponent's active Ultra Beast as well, so pretty versatile. Obviously not Zoroark, but still a decent drawing stage 1 nonetheless. I've put a 2+ here because I would say if you're just generally trying to pick up cards, I would always pick up 2 Silvally, but if you're specifically interested in trying out the Silvally Volcarona deck, I would probably bump this up to 4 copies. So if that's what's on your mind, you can definitely go further down the rabbit hole with Silvally. I definitely want to pick up one Oricorio GX. It's a fantastic card. It really does remind me of Oranguru. It says that if one of your Pokemon was knocked out last turn, you get to draw 3 cards. So this is a great stamp proofing mechanism. It's kind of like a light version of Persian GX. Obviously, that's stage 1 that can get you to tutor any cards. So that's really awesome. Obviously, it's just 1 space in your deck, and it's very searchable thanks to Treasure as well as Cherish Ball. So I really think some decks will benefit from this card having a stamp proofing mechanism. Again, it's similar to the Silvally. They kind of compete with one another. And both suffer from the same issues like Power Plant, and if people are playing the new Mimikyu that's also on this slide, and Shrine, people can get around it and also shut this down, but you've got to make them have more combo pieces to disrupt you, otherwise you'll just draw out of Reset Stamp and still close the game, which is really cool. There's the new Charizard and Braixen GX, which I think is very powerful. I think at the very minimum, it's an option that you can put in as a 1-of in Greenzard, potentially even a 2-of, as the list is currently, because it helps you against non-GX matchups, because it just can quite easily do 180 and also use its text, which allows you to search your deck for any 3 cards and put them straight into your hand, similar to Magical Ribbon from Sylveon GX way back when. And that means you can be grabbing all sorts of things, be it healing options or hand disruption options as well. I really do think this attacker is a guaranteed 1-of in Greenzard at the very least. But once again, I think you can take this further. If you want to go for a full-on Charizard Braixen deck, I don't think you're crazy. You can end up picking up 3 or 4 copies of this card and really centering your entire deck around it as well, if you do believe that's going to be a great deck. I think it's definitely got potential, because just that tutoring of 3 cards is very strong. Obviously, there is disruption elements in the format right now. There's Judge and there's opposing reset stamps that will hurt this, but in general, stamps are usually at like a 2 count in many decks, and there's only Pikarom really playing Judge. So you can get around that in a lot of matchups and really get a lot of value from that attack for sure. Volcarona, I've put in a similar vein to that Silvally, where I've put it as a 2+. I think if you like playing Ability Zard, or just even other Zard variants out there right now, you can definitely benefit from having a couple of Volcarona thrown into your deck and increasing your damage output. Its ability allows you to discard a fire from hand, and then you get to put 2 counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. Very simple, very powerful for a stage 1, and gives fire even more damage support, which is incredible. It also can do 160 for 2 fire and a colorless, and then you put 2 fire energies back into your hand. It's a little bit pesky. You can't really chain the attack so well, but you always have Welder to fall back on, don't forget. And sometimes putting those energies back into your hand is really nice if you're trying to have a swarm of Volcaronas, so you just have instant fuel for your own ability for the next turn, which is really cool. Again, I've put this at a plus just because if you're trying to build the Sylvalai or Corona deck, you'll definitely want to max this out and get 4 copies as well. For the big dragon types of the set, there's the Reshiram and Zekrom Tag Team GX. Definitely a powerhouse for a fire and lightning. You do 90 times the amount of fire and lightning energy you discard from your bench Pokemon up to 3. So your maximum output is 270, and that's committing only 2 energy to your active, and with lots of energy acceleration available for this deck because you're using both fire and lightning. It means you have Tapu Koko available, it means you have Welder available, it means you have Ends Resolve, the new supporter, available, and of course this is a dragon type, so you also have Mysterious Treasure available, so you can use Naganadel quite effectively in this deck. So I can imagine this archetype being very similar to Blacephalon in how it plays, or more similar to Turbo Turtles if anyone's played that sort of rogue variant before this set was released. And it can definitely be like a great finisher that's fantastic at dealing with opposing tag teams, which is crazy. It also has a equally crazy GX attack for 2 fire, 2 lightning. You do a 170 damage snipe, but if you played an Ends Resolve that turn, you get to snipe 2 Pokemon instead, which is just absurd, really. If there's not a Mew in play, you can just easily clean up the board and get huge tempo swings off of that attack alone. There's also the Arceus Dialga Palkia. I've put this in as a 3 copy, mainly for that future potential. I don't really foresee it carving out a tier 1 or 2 contender immediately, just because its own attack cost is a little bit awkward. You probably have to rely on some funky plays like Ends Resolve, or playing things like Energy Switch and some sort of like turn 1 Energy Accelerator. I've seen a few people try it with Rayquaza GX just to use Stormy Winds, and then you Energy Switch it over to your Arceus Dialga Palkia just to accelerate your own attack costs. But I think that is a little bit awkward and a little bit wishful thinking overall. Perhaps it will end up paying off, but the straight facts is that GX attack is very powerful for a metal and water. You get to take an extra prize for every knockout you take for the rest of the game, which is crazy, as well as having the plus 30 damage. You can already just do the plus 30 with the regular 1 metal attack cost, so do bear that in mind. You basically give yourself a hidden choice band for the rest of the game, which is pretty crazy. His second is a sort of non-GX attack as well. His normal attack just does 150, and you can accelerate 3 energies from the deck, which is basically full blitz, but with more steps, because you don't really have the Thunder Mountain on your side, and you don't have Tapu Koko, so you'll have to try and get a way to power this guy up a little bit quicker, or just accept that you're going to be a slightly slower deck, and hope that you can sort of regain that momentum thanks to taking extra prizes when you actually do take knockouts. So I've conservatively put this at a 3 count. I can definitely see people playing less and actually just not picking this guy up straight away. I was very close to putting this on the other slide, the Believer buy list, but I do think like the raw potential of that GS attack is worth it to just get him in basically for the binder. Even if the Keldeo archetype doesn't really work out straight away, he'll definitely be like explored in the future for sure. There's a fantastic non-GX Mimikyu that has that really pesky ability that shuts down GX Pokemon's abilities that have damage counters on them. I think this is a crazy good card the more I think about it. I think I actually underrated it in my set review quite a lot, because I think it will be in many ways trying to warp the game towards non-GXs, and really is going to be a spanner in the works for Mewtwo a lot of the time. Even if it does force Mewtwo to play things like Stealthy Hood, that eats into their consistency spaces and the spaces in the deck that they can have for tech Pokemon. So I really do think that Mimikyu is crazy, and even though you only need 1 copy, it's a hugely impactful card that you need to have in the binder the whole time. It's like having a Mew or like an Oranguru or something else of that ilk just in your binder at all times. You just need that Mimikyu. Blacephalon's a great tool for Malamar. It's got some very flexible damage. When you're, well, for a Psychic and Colorless, you can place 4 counters wherever you like, but if your opponent's on 3 prizes, you get to do that, but for 12 damage counters instead. It's basically like a second version of Espeon Deoxys that you can have in your deck now, so I definitely think that Malamar can have very, very flexible damage output and is really scary alongside things like Espeon Deoxys, Meowstic, and even things like Spell Tag in general, so that card is definitely worth experimenting with Spell Tag Mali. Do bear in mind, though, that there's probably going to be great catches going into Malamar already, and I think we may be moving away from a spread-based variant, so I wouldn't pick up more than 1 copy of this card, especially because he's only really useful on 1 turn. Guzzlord is a big payoff non-GX that we can have for Dark Box. I already mentioned how good red and blue that supporter is for Dark Box, but I think Guzzlord is a big payoff card. He's a very chunky non-GX with 150 hit points, and for 2 dark, 2 colorless, you do 120, and take an additional prize card when you do take a knockout on things, which is really, really good. That 120 math is pretty reasonable when you have things like Darkrai that can do 150 to active tag teams, as well as doing 60 on the bench to either set up opposing Pokemon, like Dedenne, that you could then Great Catcher with this Guzzlord and take 3 prizes on. So I really do think this is a powerful card for sure. It kind of competes with Sabltar, and it might end up just being a one-of, but I think I would err on the sort of side of caution and have 2, sorry. Finally on this slide, I'm opting to believe in Excadrill enough. He's a fighting type stage 1, that for 1 fighting, you can do 120 with a second attack. You do have to discard the top 4 cards of your deck, which isn't great, but I think this is just a phenomenal Dedenne sort of poacher. You're going to just try and kit out whatever deck you're playing with a bunch of Great Catchers, and whenever you see a Dedenne hit the board, you're just going to spend your turn knocking it out with a Excadrill and getting a nice uptrade. He's also chunky. He has 140 hit points, and he also has a 4 retreat cost, which is relevant for a Steelix that we'll talk about later. So this card is just a nice Dedenne Assassin is worth picking up, I think, in a decent number for sure. We move on to the Believer buy list now. I think some of these may end up being like mid-tier contenders. They might have showings here and there at League Cups and are definitely worth exploring for future, which is really cool. Or at the same time, if I don't think they're immediately great, they have the potential at the very least. On this top line, we have a bunch of non-GX style attackers. Sawsbuck is the one that I'm in love with. It can draw you a card with its ability every turn, and it does a 60 hit and run attack, which combines with that Lily's Clefairy doll that we've already talked about really nicely, and I definitely want to build around this. There's already a deck on the channel if you want to look into that in a bit more detail. There's stage 2 Gallade, which has dual typing. It can be a psychic and a fighting type, which is great type coverage against things like Pika-Rom, Dedenne as well, and also things like the new Silvally GX, which is really awesome, and he can also sort of benefit from all sorts of different energies in the deck. You can, thanks to your like colorless attack cost, you can try and have things like triple acceleration, you can have draw energy, recycle energy, all sorts of different things are available for this card, which is cool. There's an Alolan Persian, which can attack for free, and it does 10 times the amount of tools in your discard pile. So the idea is going to be having a bunch of Fairy Charms, which are annoying for certain decks in particular, and then you're just going to try and have an army of those Pokemon. You throw away all the tools that are not relevant in the matchup, and that becomes your damage output. There's a Steelix that I profiled, I think it was just yesterday, and you do 50 times the amount of 4 retreat cost Pokemon that you discard from your hand. Definitely a wacky archetype that I want to test out for sure. There's a Raichu deck, which is all based around trying to use Pachirisu to accelerate a bunch of energy in the early game. I've also heard a few other people talk about this, just foregoing the Pachirisu Nuzzle engine and instead going down the Naganadel route and having Charge Up at your side as well. That could also be reasonable for sure, especially because it gives you additional like backup attackers and type coverage as well, which is pretty reasonable. There's a Tangrowth that does 10 plus 30 more for each retreat cost in your opponent's active that your opponent's active has. You try and bulk it up with a bunch of Absol. If you're in a tag team meta, this can actually do a lot for 1 energy. There's a Flygon GX. It is a stage 2. That makes me instantly skeptical, especially because its attack cost isn't great, but you can try and mitigate that with things like red and blue, or even things like that Karate Belt that we have in the format, which shouldn't be slept on because his damage output is pretty reasonable, and his ability reduces damage done to him by 30, so he is pretty tanky to be fair. We then have the Roxy package. I didn't think Roxy was quite good enough to like definitely pick up 4 obs, but if the supporter ends up being strong, you probably want to also pick up the Coughings and the Wheezings in high numbers. The Roxy allows you to discard up to 2 Pokemon from your hand that are not GXs, and then you draw 3 for each that you discarded. And then if a Coughing or Wheezing is discarded by this effect, you get to do 1 counter to all of your opponent's Pokemon. So this might combine just to make the actual the regular, like what's it called, I don't even remember the ability anymore. The Wheezing used to be so popular. Detention Gas Wheezing, that one, yeah, that guy may end up becoming like more of an archetype now because you have more fuel, I guess you could say, as a draw engine alongside it, giving you potentially like more burst damage with the Roxy, which could be pretty cool. But yeah, I think overall Weezing without the things like double colorless energy and counter energy isn't going to be strong enough, but this does definitely give it a bit of a power injection. Back over to the far left, we have Beastites, definitely a powerful tool for Ultra Beasts in general. I think that's the reason why I think it's more of a believer card, because I think Ultra Beasts don't really need this too much. But you get to do 10 more damage for each prize card you've taken already. So it's the definition of a win more card, but can definitely help you get over the line. We have a few other Malamar options. Lily's Full Force isn't really the strongest of supporters. Lets you draw 4 for that turn, but then you have to reduce your hand size down to, I think, 2 cards by shuffling back in the other pieces. So that's a little bit awkward. That's at the end of your turn, by the way. The reason why I'm mentioning this card is because we do have a new Solgaleo and Lunala GX, which can really pop off if you do use Lily's Full Force in that turn. The GX attack does 200, and then your opponent is not able to do any damage or any effects of your attack. Like, it's all negated from all of your Pokemon the following turn. So it's basically buying you a free turn to... It's like a free a free 200 damage, which is really, really strong. So that might be worth building around for Malamar. There's also a Marshadow, which can copy one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks, I think. It kind of competes with Mimikyu, but it still could be a reasonable card to pick up for Malamar. On this bottom line, we have a Magneton that can knock itself out, but it allows you to search your deck for 3 supporters. This could be pretty cool for making combos happen. Lieutenant Surge definitely springs to mind immediately because you'll be going down in prizes, and it can let you pop off with all sorts of combos, be it handlock-based combos that we've already seen with Jesse, James, Mars, and Reset Stamp and all that sort of stuff. It could even be things like Hat Ladies if you're trying to pop off with damage. It could also be used alongside Psyduck and Slowpoke if you just want to go ahead and get yourself 90 damage out the gate, giving up a prize card in the process. Could be pretty reasonable, which is cool. There's an Alolan Persian, which is a really annoying wall that you might want to look into. His own damage output isn't strong, but if you're trying to build some sort of Keldeo, Alolan Persian like wall deck that we've seen previously, this card is definitely an addition that you could look towards. Blastoise and Piplup, I think it's a little bit slow right now. Its type coverage is pretty strong, and it's really good at healing. It essentially does 150, and you can attach up to 3 waters to your Pokemon in any way that you like. I think it's your bench Pokemon in any way that you like. But for each you attach, you heal 50 damage, and that's actually pretty crazy. If you're up against some 2-hit KO-based decks, you can really make life very difficult for them with that amount of healing that you do have. My biggest issue is how slow this card is, and I don't think this is necessarily a card that Quagnag is calling out for, personally, because they're already a slow setup deck, and putting 3 prizes into play usually can spell trouble if you're up against other 1-hit KO based decks. So I personally don't believe in this card. I've seen a few people try and play a Greens engine around this, but I think that's like too slow compared to even like Guardian, which I think just gets way stronger. So yeah, right now I'm not a big fan, but if you do want to try and pick these guys up, you can. We have a Guzzlord Naganadel GX tag team. It can heal itself for 60 by discarding a Pokemon, which is pretty cool. It does a vanilla 180, which is reasonable. Now that we have Great Catcher in the format, it can at least mop up Dedenes pretty happily. And its GX attack is the thing that most people are like sort of excited about. For that same colorless, psychic, and dark cost, you get to flip all your prize cards over, then just take 2 immediately. That's after you flipped, by the way, so you can pick your 2 favorite cards like from your prizes immediately and just grab those. It's sort of been touted as being like potentially a Dark Box card, potentially a Malamar card, but ultimately I think it falls short of both. If you do want to have that busted GX attack, though, you might want to try and work him in as a 1 count. We've got the evolutions. There's potential for evolutions to become more of a thing in the next set. Again, all the GX evolutions, they do also gain the red and blue supporter, so that can really speed up things like Glaceon getting attacking. Flareon has this alongside Welder now, so you have more inherent consistency. And these non-GXs definitely help you out. The Jolteon reduces your attack cost by 1. The Vaporeon gives you 60 more hit points, and the Flareon gives you 30 more damage. So these are all pretty reasonable. And the Eevee would have to be a 4-of because its colorless attack gets you to search your deck for any number of Eevee and EVGX and put them straight onto your bench, which is also a really nice setup attack for something like this, where you probably want to have multiple stage 1s on board to get the full value. Misty and Lorelei is a tag team supporter. It allows you to search your deck for 3 water and put them straight into your hand, which is pretty bad. It's like worse than a lady, I would say. But you also get to discard 5 cards from your hand, and then you are able to basically unflip your GX marker for water types, which is pretty cool. You essentially get to do some more Articuno GX plays or Keldeo GX attacks. I think those are the biggest ones that spring to my mind straight away, potentially even Glaceon GX attacks. Ultimately, this is a huge cost. Discarding essentially 6 cards from your hand whilst also spending your supporter to, instead of like draw, it removes a bunch of cards from your hand. It's actually pretty crazy. So I think this is one that you kind of just laugh at for a little bit until it becomes something crazy. If there's an archetype that can support it, this could be pretty cool. Similar thing for Will. It allows you to choose the outcome of a coin flip this turn. That's on your own attacks, abilities, or like trainer cards that you can play, which is pretty nuts. There's some pretty wacky combos that people have sort of touted. I think overall Will is pretty slow. The only reason I recommend picking 2 up is like if it's just good enough in like Pidgeotto control to guarantee a Crushing Hammer on a turn, or guarantee some other like flip effect, this might just be like worthwhile. Could also use a Super Scoop Up for free to like pick up an Articuno that you played, or something else along those lines. So Will might just be reasonable enough in very unique combo decks, potentially using Lucamine to recover that Will when you need to as well. I've decided to put 2 Floette in here. I don't think the Flabébés or the the Florgus are strong enough to pick up, but I do think the Floette might just be, because it may end up being a card alongside the other Florgus that we already have in the set, if you're going to be playing Florsbuck. So yeah, I said that I would pick up 2, so I thought I'd put it in the video as well. Finally, in the bottom right corner, we have this Ultra Necrozma. Now, I rate this card very low in Standard, but I thought I'd just give it a nod for expanded purposes, because you have double Dragon Energy, and you can also remove his ability, which stops him attacking until your opponent has only 3 prize cards left. You can turn that off quite easily with either Silent Lab or with your own Garbodor, and then you can just be smacking for 170 for 1 attachment every turn. And that sounds pretty good, especially if you're using double dragons already. You can use Arceus Palkia Dialga to use that GX attack super early. You can do it as your first attack of the game, and then every time you're smacking for 170, you're taking additional prizes, so that's really hideous to deal with. So yeah, definitely a cool one. I think not worth it if you're looking at Standard at all. I think almost all the discussion today was for Standard, but I like saw that Ultra Necrozma and I was like, man, this card is definitely reasonable for Expanded. I think he's pretty cool, possibly like the best non-GX attacking deck we have. Maybe that's a bit much, but yeah, I think the card's cool for sure. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my rundown of the buy list. Let me know if I missed anything. Get it in the comments down below. If you think something deserved to be on the core essentials, if you think something on the core essentials didn't deserve to be there, I'll hear it all in the discussion down below. If I got anything wrong with any of the cards, this was all off memory, just from, there's Japanese text right now. So do forgive me if I stumbled on my words or got anything slightly wrong. You can bash me in the comments down below. But in general, I hope you found this video useful, and that sets you up for buying singles from this set, or if you are looking to buy boxes as well, good luck to you. This is a nightmare for collectors. I think because I'm a collector myself, I looked at how many holographic, like individual holographic plus cards there are, and I think it's like 70 from this set. So this is a real mission if you are going to be a collector. So good luck to you as well if you're going to be buying boxes or going to pre-releases this weekend. So that's it for this video, guys. Hope you did enjoy, and I'll see you tomorrow for another one. Cheers.